COVID-19 has caused an economic calamity that will shrink the global economy 4.4% this year and will strip $11 trillion worth of output next year. These are the new projections by the International Monetary Fund. During the latest annual meetings, the managing director of the IMF, Georgieva, said that the world faces a long ascent for the global economy. The IMF has just issued a new regional economic outlook for Middle East and Central Asia. To talk about it, Mr. Jihad Azour, the head of the Central Asia and Middle East Department at the IMF, is joining me today from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Mr. Azour. Thank you for joining. Now, according to the newest economic outlook by the IMF, the regional economy will shrink 4.1% this year, and that is 1.3 percentage points larger than the projection in April when you and I last spoke. What is the economic forecast for Kazakhstan in 2020, and how will the national economy perform in 2021?
Thank you for having me. As you know, this year was an exceptional year, a year like no other. The region has been subjected to several shocks, the COVID-19, and then after that, the drop in oil price that had an impact on the oil and gas exporting countries from the region. One could say that the region was able, and countries in the region, to address both shocks and find the right policies to mitigate their impact. Measures were introduced to protect lives, protect livelihoods, and make sure that economic stability is maintained. In the case, for example, of Kazakhstan, a certain number of measures were introduced to provide the needed support for the healthcare sector, protect the life of people, but also a certain number of measures were introduced to allow the economy to be protected from those shocks with fiscal measures as well as also measures by the central bank in terms of liquidity support through the banking system. In addition, the flexibility in the exchange rate allowed, for example, Kazakhstan to reduce the impact of those external shocks on the economy. Of course, with this drop in oil price, all countries have been affected. But I think the priority now is to keep the focus on protecting lives, protecting livelihoods, and make sure that the risks of scarring to the economy are limited.
Now, as you have just mentioned, as an oil exporting country, Kazakhstan is very sensitive to the external shocks and volatilities on the global oil market. What is the global oil price forecast that was taken into account in this regional economic outlook to forecast the economic growth in the region?
Well, after high volatility this year, we expect oil price to close the year at a rate of $41 to $42 a barrel. Of course, in the next day or two, we will see the negotiations that are taking place in terms of extending the OPEC Plus agreement. But also there is an important variable here in defining the price of oil, which is the demand. And this will depend on the recovery that the global economy will go through. And this is something that's still uncertain because it depends on the rapidity of finding a vaccine, as well as also the strength of recovery that we see in Asia, as well as also in advanced economies.
Now, the world is laser focused on finding a vaccine. How much does the economic recovery depend on an effective vaccine being found and ready for mass production and use?
Well, of course, there are progress in the research, but there is no certainty yet. But as soon as a vaccine is discovered and used, and gradually we return back to an activity that is close to the normal activity we had before, we expect that certain number of sectors will regain momentum. Having said that, I think we are entering into a new globalization era whereby a certain number of activities will accelerate, activities that are technology-based, activities that are into greening the economy. Those sectors will gain momentum. And a certain number of sectors will need maybe a longer period to recover. And this is why it's very important, and this is part of our recommendations, is to avoid having large scars to the economy and prepare for the recovery. And for that, we believe investment in technology, improving the quality of education, diversifying the source of supplies, strengthening some of the new economic routes will be important for the Caucasus and Central Asian countries in order to prepare for a fast and strong recovery.
Kazakhstan's central bank has lowered its base rate to 9% in July, and that was the time when the country was having its highest daily numbers of COVID-19 cases, and death rate was pretty high as well. The central bank will revise its base rate on October 26. Apart from that, there has been an early economic response strategy from the government. Liquidity has been made available for lending, and there has been monetary policies put in place to mitigate the economic challenge caused by the pandemic. What are some of the measures that the IMF would recommend Kazakhstan at the moment?
Well, the government and the central bank introduced a package of measures that were very effective in reducing the impact of the pandemic on the economy, providing a floor to economic activities, and through injection of liquidities and adjustment in interest rates to allow the private sector to maintain the access to funding. Those measures helped cushion the economy and limit the decline in growth. If we compare Kazakhstan to other oil-exporting countries in the world, we see that in relative terms, the performance of the economy in Kazakhstan were, despite the severity of the shock, better than other parts of the world. And this is thanks to the rapid response, thanks to what the Ministry of Finance and the central bank have introduced. The reforms that were done over the last 5 years also helped by improving the financial situation of the financial sector, reducing the level of invulnerabilities, and allowing through the flexible exchange rate regime to the economy to amortize and reduce the impact of any exogenous shock. Going forward, the president of Kazakhstan and the government are working on a recovery plan, charting the course for the next 10 years around fast-growing sectors, using technology as an accelerator for this transformation. Those are steps in the right direction. Going forward, it's important to maintain the stability of the financial system, keep banks liquid and solvent, and also use this opportunity to accelerate some of the reforms by improving business environment, reforming the state-owned entities and the state-owned enterprises, and also promote more inclusion of the small and medium-sized companies as well as also the startups.
The risk of the second surge of the virus remains high. Amid low consumer spending, new and strict measures will cripple the surviving small and medium-sized businesses, especially those engaged in the tourism industry, in retail and service sector. What are the recommendations here?
Well, of course, this is a crisis that, like no others, and we did not see similar crisis in the last decades. And therefore, it's very important to recognize the impact of the crisis. The priorities are to protect the most vulnerable. For example, those who are in the informal sector, those who are in rural areas, youth, unemployed women, and increase their capacity to participate in the economy. This crisis showed that, for example, being able to work remotely, it's an important plus to protect jobs. And therefore, any investment that goes into this direction is welcome. Any investment that goes into promoting and improving the quality of distance learning is also very important. Any programs of rehabilitation, training of employees who are working in sectors that will be affected by the crisis for some time is also something that is needed. Therefore, I think we have to accept that this is a setback to the economy. What is important is A, to protect people and to protect their lives. B is allow the economy to keep the engines functioning and ready to start again when needed. And this in a context of preserving the medium-term stability of the economy. And this is why it is important to keep the buffers and the level of reserves that are already ample in the case of Kazakhstan. Keep the financial sector liquid and solvent in order for it to be able to finance the recovery when time comes, and also to adjust to the new global economy, especially that after this crisis, there are a certain number of changes that will happen into the global economy.
Mr. Azour, the living standards are visibly deteriorating. The national currency tenge has lost 20% of its value during this year. The inflation rate is at 7%. And the pandemic has hit the most vulnerable. And during the crisis, the Kazakh government has introduced a measure, cash relief measure for the people who have reported loss of income. So an adult individual received a maximum of $250 worth of cash relief since March in the past 6 months. There has been an outcry and criticism from the public as to how low this support has been. Amid the risk of rising poverty, how important is sustained social assistance?
Well, nobody was prepared to this crisis and nobody was expecting the magnitude of it. And therefore, government has to devise very quickly programs in order to provide support to the livelihood of people. Of course, in economies where you have high level of informality, the effectiveness of those measures is limited. When your social system is not fully deployed, also you can't have the same effectiveness that countries who have already very well functioning social systems. But I think this crisis was also a wake-up call and a call for action in order to look into all these issues and use this crisis as an opportunity to address them. And in the case of Kazakhstan, a country that has in the last decades done a great deal of diversifying the economy, linking the economy to the global system. Now, I think it's important to look forward and see where the next wave of growth will be and how to make sure that Kazakhstan will be well placed to benefit from it.
Mr. Azour, I want to now talk about the region at large, Central Asia and Caucasus. The unfortunate events happening, the worsening of the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia, also the political instability in Kyrgyzstan. Were these events taken into account in the new economic outlook, and how will these events affect the local economies?
Well, any tension from whatever source will negatively impact economies. And in the case of the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, like others, we call for an immediate ceasefire and solving this problem through diplomatic means, which will be the best outcome possible. The same also, the level of uncertainty that has grown in the case of Kyrgyz Republic is also something that could have a negative impact on the economy. And therefore, it's important to strengthen the capacity of the regional economy to withstand shocks. And also, going forward, it will be very useful to increase the level of cooperation among countries and strengthen the partnership, which is the best way to reduce any tension. And also, this is a good way to create an economic space that would benefit all the people of the region too.
In the latest annual meetings of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva said that today the world faces a new Bretton Woods moment. Is this pandemic an opportunity for countries rethink the way they cooperate and respond to common challenge? And how should that be realized moving forward?
We at the IMF consider this as one of the key priorities for the future, and we are working toward achieving that. As you know, in our case, we are going to have our regional center for capacity development and technical assistance in the region, and exactly in Kazakhstan, in Almaty. The role of this center is to promote greater economic integration, additional cooperation among countries in the region, in order to improve economic management and increase the prosperity for countries in the region. In addition to that, we have provided certain number of financial assistance to countries who were facing the challenge of the COVID-19, and we're supporting reform programs. We believe that by addressing the challenges that we are going through globally and at the regional level, and finding solutions and using this as an opportunity to transform this challenge into something better for our economies is what we aim at achieving. And this is something that we will keep working on as a fund with other international organizations and our partner countries to achieve this objective.
Mr. Azour, obviously we all want the world to be safer and better once the pandemic is over. But while we're fighting it and fighting the economic challenge around it, Kazakh government has allocated $13 billion for anti-crisis measures. How to ensure at this time and at this moment that these efforts actually reach the most vulnerable? How do we make sure that recovery is not only steady, but it's also inclusive?
Well, this is an important issue, and it's a challenge that many countries are facing. For that, there are a certain number of priorities. One is to reduce the level of informality that reduces the effectiveness of social policies. Second, there are two categories that are in great need of integration are the youth and women. And providing them with opportunities will allow them not only to find a better future, but also to improve the future of the whole country. And this is something that can be done by investing in technology, by improving the competitiveness of the economy, reduce any red tape and bottlenecks, and allow new startups to flourish. This is the priority for the next decade, is to have the recovery being green, technology-based, and socially conscious. And this will help to build a stronger economy going forward, economy that is less dependent, in the case of Kazakhstan, on hydrocarbon, and more benefiting from the talent of the young Kazakhs.
Mr. Azour, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.